Welcome to the Haunted Lounge, where shadows linger and the spirits flow. Join your host on a journey into the unexplained, sharing tales from the darkest corners of America. Ghosts, legends, and the pursuit of the truth behind them. Light a cigar, pour a drink, and pull up a chair. The night is just getting started.
Hi, I'm Dan. Welcome to the Haunted Lounge. Tonight, I'm going to take you on a trip. Not one of distance, but one of time. Time going back to 1941. Place, Cape Girardeau, Missouri. Cape Girardeau is home to the Haunted Lounge, and we have several mysteries here, most of which I'll be sharing over the course of these episodes. Tonight, the one I'm sharing was one that I found completely intriguing because I hadn't heard of it until recently. 1941. Cape Girardeau along the Mississippi River. Small town, neighbors waving to neighbors, kids playing tag in the growing dusk of the evening. April 1941. Near the Red Star Baptist Church on North Main Street. Friendly people waving. Cool snap had just occurred. Temperatures in the 50s. As you look through the window of a house on North Main, you see a family gathered there. Father, mother, two sons, and an expectant daughter-in-law, all enjoying conversation. This is the home of Reverend William Huff, his wife Floy, his two sons, and his expectant daughter-in-law had come over to visit. Having a nice evening. It's one of those evenings you wish could stretch on forever. And then the phone rang. Reverend picked up the phone, and on the other end was the sheriff, who asked him if he could come out and administer last rites to some passengers of a craft that had gone down near the airport outside of town. The Reverend took his job seriously. It's one of the reasons he was so well respected in town. He took his Bible off the shelf, kissed his wife on the cheek, told his sons and daughter-in-law goodbye, went outside to wait for the vehicle the sheriff said was coming. It wasn't a sheriff's cruiser that pulled up, however. It was an unmarked sedan. The gentleman stepped out in a suit, introduced himself as a member of the FBI. They traveled the 15 minutes or so outside of town to where the crash had happened. Cold light of the stars shining through the windshield. I'm sure Reverend Huffman was preparing himself for the administration of last rites. Could see the glow of fire as they approached from the crash. When he arrived, the scene was not like what he was expecting. There were no wings, propellers, tail section flying around. What he saw was a disc, shiny and metallic, embedded in a field. The disc had a large rent area on the side, and he could see into it. As he approached, he saw a myriad of gauges, dials, small seats, nothing like he had seen before. Inside was also writing of a type that he was not familiar with. He later would say it looked like hieroglyphics. And then there were the bodies. Lying near the craft were two small gray figures. Heads larger than a human's, arms long with 3 fingers, skin that looked metallic in nature, wrinkled, unlike normal skin. Nothing about this was normal. These two were laying just outside the craft, and there was a third a short distance away. The law enforcement officers were speculating in the background that perhaps that one individual had crawled away from the crash site and expired a short distance away. Reverend Huffman knelt down and administered last rites, as he was asked to do. Nothing like this had ever occurred to him before, but duty was duty, and he did what he was asked. As he stood up and brushed himself off, the scene changed. Army trucks rolled up. Several soldiers jumped out, started gathering up the bystanders and the policemen and firefighters. 2 more sedans from the FBI pulled up, and people were separated into small groups. Those groups were all told the same thing. This did not happen. You did not see this. You are not to talk about this. This is a matter of national security. If you do, there will be severe consequences. Reverend Huffman was a patriotic man. He was a good man, and that's all he needed to be told. When he got home, he did tell his wife what he had seen, and only discussed it one other time. A friend of Reverend Huffman showed up about 3 weeks later. The gentleman was a photographer for the Southeast Missourian newspaper and happened to be on scene that night. Now, the government and the military were confiscating cameras when they were separating people into groups. This gentleman happened to have a small camera tucked into his pocket, and he did manage to get one picture and had developed that. The picture showed 2 firefighters holding up one of the gray entities. Each had it under the arm and were lifting it up. Its form stretching approximately 4 feet from the top of its head to its feet. The gentleman said that he had printed 2 copies of this because this was going to disappear and there needed to be a record. He wanted the Reverend to have one since they were good friends, and he knew that it wouldn't be sensationalized. That was the last that this was discussed until 1980, when the Reverend's wife was passing away from end-stage cancer. Her granddaughter was talking with her and had asked about this story that she had heard about from her mother several times. She had seen the picture once or twice over the course of her life and asked her grandmother about it. And over the course of 2 days, her grandmother related this story. The granddaughter tried as much as she could to find out any further information about this, but it seemed as if the record had been scrubbed. So in 1941, in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, an alien spacecraft, alien entities, a language inside the craft that looked like hieroglyphics, pieces of the craft torn away. Why didn't Cape Girardeau, Missouri explode onto the world scene? Why was this information so closely guarded? And yet in 1947, a very similar incident occurred in Roswell, New Mexico. Ship crashed, pieces were taken, and it was sensationalized. Roswell is now the home of the UFO as far as tourism goes. Why didn't this happen with Cape Girardeau in 1941? Could have been a couple reasons. 1941, the specter of war loomed heavy over the country. The government may have been afraid that if people were seeing alien spacecraft under every rock and behind every bush, that reports of actual activity coming into the continental United States may have been obscured. They may also have had other reasons. What those are, we can only speculate. But the secrecy may have been for more than just the war effort. After the war, 1947, it was a different time. The country was rebuilding, and it was time to look ahead. It was a time of growth. And perhaps that's why Roswell exploded, so to speak, and this Cape Trout incident was lost in obscurity. I'm glad I ran across it because it's a piece of history in this area in which I live that is fascinating to me. How something like this can happen, and then over the course of 70 years, 80 years, just vanishes into the past. Of course, I think we all tend to forget the past all too often, and that's why the saying about being doomed to repeat it is there. Also wanted to relate a couple other stories. These are related stories to this for me, and they're personal. The first one I want to talk about occurred after this incident in the 1950s. My parents were avid bow hunters. They were part of a local archery club. My mom actually took silver in 1966 in the field archery trials. They loved shooting bow, and the only thing they loved more than that was deer hunting. They were headed out on the opening morning of deer season, geared up in their camouflage with their bows in the back seat of the car to Duck Creek Wildlife Area. As they were driving, it was a very foggy morning. It was well before daylight. They were planning on getting there and getting their archery stands. My father happened to look up in the rearview mirror and saw what he thought were headlights coming up behind them really quickly. My mom later told me he looked at her and said, "Joyce, this guy is going to hit us." But he didn't. The vehicle never struck. What happened was, again, unidentified object. Went up and over my parents' car and continued down the road, 2 lights, traveling quickly, disappearing into the fog. My parents looked at each other, astounded, flabbergasted by what they had seen, and discussed it all the way to the parking lot of the area where they were going to hunt. Now, knowing my parents, this situation, experience, whatever, with anybody else, it would be front page news. They would have been calling everyone. They would have gone back to town and told everyone. But the only thing my parents were equally as concerned about at this point, knowing them, was deer hunting. They wanted to get in the stands and hunt. So that's what they did. They separated, went into the woods, and had a morning's hunt. Odd thing was, when they returned the parking area, their vehicle was the only vehicle in the lot, but all of the windows, back and sides, were blown out of the car. There was not a piece of glass inside the vehicle, but outside was the remnants of the side windows and the rear window of the vehicle. This was when they decided to call the afternoon hunt off and to return to town. The times being what they were, they shared this with a few close family members, and that was it. And like the other story, disappeared into obscurity until I was told about it by my father shortly before his passing. Was this a UFO? Were aliens aboard this crap? Who knows? Who knows what it was? But it was unidentified, and it was a flying object, if only for a brief moment when it passed over their vehicle. I myself had an odd experience as well that I'd like to relate. It was October, and some friends and I were camping at Clearwater Lake, approximately 80 miles from Cape. We were having a great time sitting by the fire. It was late, probably about 10 o'clock. It was dark. We noticed a bright light emerge from behind the trees at the opposite end of the lake. This light, approximately the same brightness as, say, a helicopter searchlight, came up and shined directly into our campsite. There was no noise, no rotor noise, no whooshing of jet engines. It was just complete silence. The light moved closer, out to about 500 feet from us, and just sat there for 20, 25 seconds, and then rapidly ascended into the sky and disappeared. We were discussing how odd this was when about 20 minutes later, helicopters started arriving in the area. There were at least 3 that were circling the campground area, the lake, and the surrounding area. And then we started hearing what sounded like jets. This went on for hours throughout the course of the evening, finally leaving off early morning. What they were looking for, I don't know. What was it? Again, I don't know. It was unidentified. So what am I saying? Am I saying that Cape Girardeau and the surrounding areas are the mecca for unidentified flying objects now? UAVs, UFOs, alien contact? No, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that if you happen to be in southeast Missouri, driving along a road near the river in the evening, sun's going down, you notice strange lights in the sky doing strange things. Pay attention and remember this episode. If you have a phone, pull it out and record it. That's one thing that people have now that they didn't have in the 40s, 50s, and I didn't think to do when I was camping. Record it. Evidence. That way, if something does happen, it can't be covered up as easily. It can be shared. Knowledge is power. So from the Haunted Lounge, I want to say thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. You can find us on Facebook or on YouTube at the Haunted Lounge Podcast. And as always, keep your drinks full, your mind open. Good night.